to the first of CNBC Africa's Road to Cape Town debate series. I'm Wole Famurewa. In June this year, over 800 local and international delegates will descend on Cape Town, South Africa for the 25th meeting of the World Economic Forum on Africa. In the lead up to this year's forum, CNBC Africa will be traveling around the continent to unpack some of the pertinent regional issues that will be highlighted at this year's meeting. Our road to Cape Town starts here in Lagos, Nigeria, where our discussion will focus on West Africa, more specifically on the growth of investment in the region. Joining me in the studio to share their insights is Emeka Uzomba, Head Treasury and Financial Services at Diamond Bank, and Angel Adelaja, Executive Director at Wole Famurewa Africa. Thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It's always interesting to talk about Africa, especially West Africa. And I guess there's that old saying, fortune favors the brave. It's not an easy place to do business, but clearly there are opportunities here. So, Emeka, if you can start by just sharing your perspective on why investors, in your view, should pay more attention to the opportunity that Africa, and specifically West Africa, offers, and perhaps less so to the risk.
Great. I think investors that focus on Africa and in West Africa, like you just said, have nothing to lose and everything to gain. You know, I mean, international investment is not because they like you or they don't like you. It's all about risk return. Yields today in West Africa, you don't find it anywhere else. And if you compare that to the downside, the risks, you know, inherent in the region presents, I mean, it's no-brainer. The problem has always been lack of sufficient awareness and understanding of the market by international investors. So you sit in the United States, you're watching the CNN, and you're hearing about Boko Haram or Ebola, and you think everybody is dead. But people have been here 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, making good money. The markets are deepening, opportunities are opening up every day. You know, the governments are getting more transparent, the financial markets are getting more sophisticated, you know. So it takes the bold to take a time out and study West African market and see that, you know, the risk that perceived to the market is nowhere near the upside from the yield side. Today we have treasury bills in Nigeria that you can invest and earn 13–14% yield. I mean, look at what the treasuries in the United States are doing. It's even going to be worse in the Europe area with the quantitative easing coming. Ghana, same story, even much more. I mean, in the 20s, where else can you get that kind of yield? These are government securities. These are risk-free instruments. So I think it just makes sense for investors to show a little bit more interest and come into this market. But that's not just for the investors to do. The participants in the market also have a role to play. They need to go and project themselves. Right. They need to tell the investors the stories the way they would love to hear it, and prove to them actually that when they do come and invest, they won't make any mistake. Well,
that's generally been a weakness of Africa, telling its story to the world. Yes. But Angel, let me get your thoughts on this point. Investment risk versus return. What's been your experience investing in Africa, and what do you say to would-be investors on the continent?
Well, I have to agree with him 100%. The opportunities are endless. I think the natural resources, aside from extractive resources, are there. For me, I'm in agriculture, and the opportunity is there. The vast amounts of land, the human capacity, the number of people, the actual market that is in Africa. So you have so many people here that you can satisfy their needs, and then you can later start thinking about exportation. So I think the opportunities are there. There are some hurdles that people will face, but I think if you're ready to ride that wave as you invest in Africa, the rewards are
You talk about hurdles, but I mean, it's kind of like we're sweeping them to the side here, but we have some big challenges on the continent. So we're talking about infrastructure. Many people say low-skilled labor force, corruption, the bureaucracy doing business here, and of course, more recently, terrorism is even an issue. Would you say, Emeka, that it's tougher to do business now in West Africa compared to, say, 10 years ago?
I don't think so. I think it's a lot more conducive, a lot easier.
So there's change coming?
Yes, for investors to come into West Africa. There's a lot more to be done, right? But it depends on the sector. Some sectors have made appreciable progress more than some other sectors. If you're looking at the financial markets, let's take Nigeria, for example, the banks in Nigeria, fantastic progress. I think the first Euro bond from a Nigerian bank was issued in 2011. Between then and last year, just 3 years before the market for Euro bond more or less shot, we have more than $3.5 billion in issue. Not too many banks, a few banks concentrated, but, and that goes back to what I said, that investors, the participants, first of all, have to prepare themselves, you know. So there will always be hurdles. There will always be improvements to be made because the infrastructural gap between here and the West is enormous. So if you're sitting in down there and you're thinking of Lagos, traffic jams, it takes you 2 hours to make a 10-kilometer journey. It could be discouraging, right? But if you invest through a local player that lives here, you know, that has played that game and can still be profitable. For instance, I mean, if you're an investor and you come into Nigeria, you don't need to come and invest in banking, telecoms, power, all at the same time. You can pick and choose. You want to invest in the financial industry. There are absolutely fantastically doing banks that are doing well. You can invest through the bonds. You can invest through capital. You know, get more comfortable with the market, and then broaden your own understanding of the market and take another step further. So it's a pick and choose thing. You know, there are challenges definitely. You know, but let those challenges not keep you, because those same challenges could actually be the opportunities for the investor to take benefit of. Look at power, Nigerian story. We don't have power. That's always been the story. You know, but if you came into Nigeria to invest in the power sector today, and you don't have a very short-term perspective, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, you know, there is no way it will not be a fantastic industry. Right. And we are not just talking because we think it will be. There have been examples in the past. Telecommunications, which everybody keeps talking about. 10 years ago, how many lines did we have in Nigeria? How many were functional? But the government opened up that sector, deregulated it, and sold licenses. You know, some companies that came here, others were wondering, were the CEOs, were the board crazy, coming to buy a telecommunication license in Nigeria at such a price. In fact, their break-even plans were busted in 6 months. So that kind of story is easily replicable in some other sectors in Nigeria. We've seen it in telecommunications, we've seen it in banking. There's no reason why we can't see it in power in the next 1 or 2 years. There's no reason why, like she mentioned, that we won't see it in agriculture. You know, these are very important sectors. Even mining, solid minerals. You know, there's also a lot of things going on there in the background. Right. You know, so it's still a fertile ground to invest in.
You certainly touched a very important point, the role of the government, and we'll certainly talk about that later on. But Angel, just your thoughts on some of the points that he has made in terms of the investment risk versus the opportunity. Is this still a good place to do business? You are invested in the market. You mentioned agriculture, and I know you're into other things as well. What's been your experience?
I think that you can't enter the market unless you're creative and unless you know the market itself. So you have to be creative enough to find financing. And if you're not getting it from traditional methods, you find other ways as a small or medium scale business owner. And then on the larger scale, I think in those challenges that you have, you're finding the need. So where there are issues in infrastructure, that's where telecommunications sprung up. So you have the mobile banking that has made things easier. You have other tools and ideas. Jumia, for example, is one that capitalized on the fact that it's very difficult to get groceries from one place to another.
Really opened up over the last few years.
And it has. So I think that definitely it's virgin territory. There's so many things that have been done in the West, and the West is so saturated, but here, those are basic needs that we need. There's so many people to satisfy, so I think those opportunities are there. I think also, if you're ready, like I said, to ride out the wave and take a longer term approach. I think because of the insecurity, a lot of people were afraid to really invest their money on a longer term because they don't know what's going to happen democratically. They don't know what's going to happen. We had the Ebola crisis. We have in Nigeria, Boko Haram. So people are a bit iffy. But I think that, like he said, you have people who have been investing in Nigeria before then and after then and during then, and they've been able to do well. And I think that as we move forward, things are only improving, and we're able to provide more infrastructure to businesses. And I think that those businesses are able to grow more than they would if they were in, let's say, Germany or in the United States. Many people are looking to Africa, especially West Africa, as the next step. For example, Del Monte Group, I was saying, they've gone from Mexico to Nigeria because it cuts the time in which their produce is sent to Europe.
Yeah.
So we're a strategic region. We're environmentally, especially for even if we can get into manufacturing or other things, we're a strategic region because we're able to provide the local needs, but we're also able to provide outside. And I think that also when you get past the infrastructure, the gross margins are very high.
Right.
So
I think a lot that I heard from you is we're starting from a very low base, so the upside is just enormous.
That's
and you've mentioned what happened in telecoms, and then of course there's the issue of innovation. So you have to be creative about how you approach this market. But with all the challenges we have, I mean, you spoke about terrorism. We just mentioned Ebola as well. Ebola came in, and I guess the region is to some extent stigmatized. Your thoughts about the real cost of that outbreak is something that some countries are still dealing with. Thankfully, Nigeria has dealt with it to a large extent. Yeah. Your thoughts on the real cost of that outbreak for West Africa?
Well, if you're talking about real cost of Ebola, we need to look at it from different perspectives. We're talking about real economic costs, monetary costs, because that is just one. There had been severe social implications of Ebola as well. You know, there have been people who have lost entire families. It will take a long while to recover. But in terms of economic costs, I don't think it is actually that huge. Initially, when Ebola happened, you know, there were several studies and people rushed into some conclusions, right? But with time, with the improvement in containing Ebola, people have had more time to do deeper analysis. And I've had different kinds of numbers. I've had as low as $500 million. I've had as high as $25 billion. But I think there's some kind of consensus building around $5–6 billion in terms of real opportunities lost to the economy. If you want to
but what about longer term, though? Because there's this tendency for this whole region to be stigmatized, especially because we still haven't dealt with it. It's still an issue in some countries.
I think I'm actually taking a different view. You know, because of the way Ebola happened, initially there was this apathy. People didn't take it seriously because they thought it was the usual Ebola thing that I've had about a couple of times before and it would go away. But this time it was different and was impacting heavily on economies. And it was even being exported from Africa. And then there was this united global effort to keep it down. You know, that in a sad way actually helped those countries that were heavily ravaged by Ebola. It has improved healthcare. It has improved social practices. People don't bury the dead anyhow now. People, even primary hygiene has improved. Those things will sustain, and they will eventually make the economies, you know, stronger by making the populace healthier, you know, more aware to disease, cleanliness, and the health system really cannot get worse than it has become now. So if not for Ebola, probably we wouldn't have seen those kind of huge efforts in improving healthcare and improving hygiene. Yeah, so there have been costs, right? But in the long term, with the improved practices and cultures and everything, it may actually begin to play out positively for those nations.
Right. Okay, so I hear you when you say that clearly in terms of personal healthcare, hygiene, etc., some countries have gained from this, but then you really have to agree that very often, especially in the West, many people look at Nigeria as Africa or Cote d'Ivoire as Africa. You know, everyone thinks Africa is one country. So that stigma, in your view, don't you think it's something that we're still grappling with going forward? Maybe, Angel, you want to deal with that? I
don't necessarily think so, because in this situation, we've been able to see that, of course, our markets were vulnerable to health insecurity. Of course, other insecurity like Boko Haram and other things. But in this case, we realized that things have to change. The way governments monitor and evaluate, monitor and have prevention methods for these things need to change. And I think Nigeria was a perfect example of being able to adapt to the situation and respond effectively. And it now makes them realize that if it's not Ebola, it could be Lassa fever, or it could be another disease that comes in, and we need to be able to quickly respond because of the toll it can take on our environment, the toll it can take on our economies, and the toll it can take on the social impacts that it has on the communities. And I think that unfortunately places like Sierra Leone and Liberia that were more heavily hit, it's been more difficult for them to rally back, but they are rallying back, and that shows that in these markets there are great opportunities there, because even with this experience, they've still been able to start to build back from there much faster than I think any other place.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
at least the good news is that it's certainly, definitely under control, at least in most of these countries.
And the other thing is that I think it's opened our eyes to opportunities. I think in places where there's not been as much investment in healthcare, in places where there's not been as much investment in, I guess, health equipment and also other allied services, people have realized that there's a need there. Yeah. And of course, when you have healthier people, you have healthier economies, because people are able to be part of the workforce, people are able to contribute to the economy. So I think that was...
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, fair point there. Okay, let's talk about the improving political climate. I think that's definitely a bright spot in Africa. Nigeria, everyone is talking about the quality of the elections, the peaceful expected handover, etc. How significant is that for investment flows into Africa? I want to start with you, Emeka.
I think it's huge, very positive, and we're already beginning to see the impact. Let me give you another example again. Just before the election, nobody was sure what was going to happen, even us locals, even though we are much more confident because we have seen politicians make noise in the past and things came and went, right? But for the international investors, it was so serious. And that was actually part of what set off the devaluation of the Naira, because international investors were living here in droves. You know, monies were flying through the wind, right? Let me go back to the Euro bonds by Nigerian banks again. And that is one index of gauging investors, you know, approach or valuation of the risk reward sector. Just before the election, those bonds trading rates went double digits. You see banks that are well rated, banks that are very well capitalized, that had issued bonds in single digit last year, and they were trading in higher double digits. We saw 15, 16%, right? Immediately after the election, in 2 weeks, we see those same bonds. Nothing has changed in the performance of the issuing banks. So it's not fundamental. It was just the election factor.
Right.
Those bonds have rallied and have tightened, that they are now in the single digits or very low double digits. This is just a matter of 2-3 weeks before the election and immediately after the election. So investors have seen the way the elections went, which surprised everybody. You know, because, like you agree, the outcome was much more than we had thought that it would be. And investors, they are rational people. They are looking for yield. They are not very sentimental. You know, when they see positive, they price in immediately. And if you just look at the trending in the prices of those bonds, that just shows you the investors' evaluation of Nigerian risk. So if we can extrapolate that to a larger investor space, you know, that just shows that the investors are ready. We already are beginning to see reversal of the flows. All those monies that are left are beginning to come in. You know, Naira has been very stable in the past 4 weeks. You know, so funds are beginning to come in from the same investors who left the shows. So their fears have been assuaged. They believe now that it's time to come take those potentials again, you know, play in those markets, especially Nigeria. You know, so in a nutshell, I think it's very positive. You know, I hear that Buhari has been invited to join the G7 meeting that's holding this weekend. He hasn't even been sworn in. He's not even a president. He's a president-elect. And the G7, as important as that body is inviting him to come join them at the meeting. Because they want to begin to understand, you know, his thoughts. They want to begin to profile how his government will be, so they begin to understand him early on. You know, so that's also a very, very credible indicator of the potential and positive impact of the Nigerian election. And so many more. We can just keep going on and on and on, but in a nutshell, generally speaking, it's been a fantastic event, very positive for the markets. All right.
Angel, do you want to add your 2 cents to that?
Definitely. I know that the local economy was, for Nigeria especially, took a big hit during the time between campaigning and the first date for elections and then the subsequent date for elections. And immediately after, you saw a change in the markets. You saw an upturn in the markets. And even the fact that what he campaigned on was to change the way government does things. He said that he wanted to focus more on implementation, not just on policy. He wants to focus a lot on infrastructure development, meaning power and transportation. I think for investors, those are two key areas. For anybody who's looking to set up business, set up shop in Nigeria, those are two key factors. Right. I went to an event where the Vice President-elect started to speak on opportunities for medium and small-scale business owners, saying that, and even large-scale business owners, if you're interested in investing in Nigeria, they want to put together a one-stop shop where, similar to how it's done in Ivory Coast, similar to how it's done in other countries, within 6 hours, you've fully registered a business and you're ready to go. And a lot of the bureaucracy and red tape is cut down. And so there's no need for maybe bribing, or there's no need to try to do things in a way that is not beneficial to your business. I think this means that for a lot of countries where some of those things are frowned upon, like America, American investors can now more comfortably come into Nigeria and do business because they know that they're not going to have to cut corners that can put them in trouble when they go back to their home countries. I think also the fact that he said that he's going to invest in human capacity development, meaning that it's so expensive to hire staff in Nigeria when it comes to getting quality, well-trained staff. So when you look at the qualifications and then you look at the compensation that you're giving them, you realize that it takes a lot from you, but when you're able to train more people, it helps to make it more competitive, and then you can really price the salaries more competitively, and you have more people who are ready to work. So I think that that opportunity brings in a lot for investors as well.
Just hold that thought. We'll continue this conversation. I really have to pause for a commercial break. We are talking about the investment growth and potential of West Africa. Welcome back to the first in a series of 3 regional discussions in the CNBC Africa World Economic Forum Road to Cape Town debate series. Still with me in the studio to take a look at the investment growth and potential in West Africa is Emeka Uzomba, Head of Treasury and Financial Institutions at Diamond Bank, and also joining us now is Osaru Alile, Senior Designer and Partner at Caxton Alile Design. And also we have Cyvette Gibson, the Mayor of Paynesville in Liberia. So we have a Liberian in the house. Thank you so much for joining us, and of course, Emeka, for staying with us. Emeka, I want to come back to you. We were talking earlier about this issue about improving the political climate, and I want to stay with that point. We have very great lessons to learn from places like Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, and of course, more recently, Nigeria. The impact of this, in your view, the improving democratic process on investment flows. Can you just stay with that point?
Yeah, sure. Like I was describing how the financial instruments issued by Nigerian banks have improved overseas, just before the election and after the announcement of the election. You can then imagine what will happen when the government is sworn in, and there's been this transition since 1999, and then the government does well, improves financial institutions, there will be a lot more stability, and what investors like is stability, clarity, so that they can profile their risks and be sure that they are not making a mistake. The fact alone that we had the election and it went through peacefully, and then we elected a credible government, has helped without even doing anything. The second thing is that when the government does come in, they will begin to look at the team that will be put in place. They will begin to listen to them much more closely and listen to the policies and evaluate those policies. I don't have any doubt that Nigeria is blessed with so many right people that can do this job. If the government is able to put them in the right places, the right finance minister, we already have central bank, all sorted, the right investment policies, it will all but just help, make investors much more confident. And given the other fundamentals of Nigeria by itself, Nigeria is a natural investment destination. The demographics are just fantastic. Huge population, 170 million people, mostly young people, growing middle class. Telecommunication has done fantastically well. So we now have today huge, deep ICT-based industry. We have mobile banking going, we have retail banking going. These are what investors globally are looking for. Today, there are more people in Nigeria and even Africa using mobile banking than in some other much more developed economies, and these are growth areas. So those are dividends of democracy in your view.
But Cyvette, if I can bring you into the conversation, of course, you're from Liberia and you also have a democracy going there. The importance of that, can you just speak to how that has impacted the growth of your economy, the development of the democratic process in your country. And to some extent, I do know that quite a few countries, especially in West Africa, also depend on foreign aid. So the importance of that, the importance of democracy for even those flows that are not just investment flows.
Well, Her Excellency, Madam Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, has exemplified every inch of the word democracy when it comes to our people. I would say that when it comes to our foreign aid, most especially that has come into the country, we've had transparency and accountability throughout. I think that all of our partners and our donors are happy with us up to today's date. I would say this administration has gone over and beyond the call of duty when it comes to allowing people to say what they would like to say, react to what the government is doing, unlike the previous administrations.
Right.
So I think that we're going in the right direction, and our partners, as I say, are very happy with us.
Right.
Yes.
And that is impacting investment activity, I imagine?
Absolutely, absolutely, because our partners, again, I see they're happy with the fact that we allow people to speak. We allow people to come up front, and if they have any issues, that they don't just remain underlying currents, but they're actually dealt with on a daily basis.
Right, so a lesson to learn from Liberia there. But so I want to get your thoughts on another issue here, the new normal of the oil industry and how that is impacting how investors are participating in markets over here in West Africa. Your thoughts on that? Because I think there's a big concern, especially in Nigeria, especially when you saw what happened to the Naira, once we saw the oil price decline. Are we ready for this new normal economy, if you like?
First of all, I don't think we have a choice, but we have to be ready. I think it's kind of like a negative positive, because it's forcing Nigerians to look outside of the box. They're so used to...
So it's a blessing in disguise.
It's a blessing in disguise, exactly. Everyone has put their egg in one basket. Oil industry, that's what we've been excited about, that's what we're used to. But now it's forcing us to look outside of that. There's other things that you could do apart from oil. Like, for example, I'm in the design industry, and that's an industry that has grown so much in Nigeria in the last 3 years. I've been in that industry in Nigeria for 8 years now, and I can say the last 3 years have been extremely amazing. Like, I get emails from Italy, from France, from Turkey, from Dubai. People say, we want to do business with you in Nigeria. What's going on? So people are starting to understand that there are other things that could do. And the young lady that was here earlier, farming is something that I think it's agriculture. It's very big in Nigeria. Before Nigeria gained our independence, before the 1960, we were a farming-based, agriculture-based country. So, I mean, the land is still there. It's still the same soil. It's still the same people. So I think we can go back to that easily without having a problem. But it's just because Nigerians were so used to the ease of the oil industry. It's faster. I mean, not that it's easy, but it was faster, more lucrative business. But I think it's
okay to call it easy.
Yeah,
easy
well,
money
easier
it's
money.
It spoils
exactly.
us, really.
It's spoiled, one that has spoiled it. But now it just forces us to look outside of that, and I think it's good.
Emeka, you're a banker, so I imagine you deal with entrepreneurs all the time. Is that dynamic changing significantly in your view? We're now going beyond oil in Nigeria, for instance?
I would say yes. She's very correct in everything that she said. And like you termed the new normal, it's a blessing in disguise, but it will also maybe get some time getting used to it, right? Because if you are a business, there is no way the price of your key factor can change 50%. And no matter how well run you are, that you will not feel the impact. Nigeria is oil economy, oil dependent, right? So there's no way oil price could have dropped by almost 50% and it wouldn't have impacted on us negatively. But it's now, what do we do with that? We'll see some business fail. It is clear, and that is reality. We'll see a couple of others struggle. We'll see maybe unemployment go up because some companies, in terms of adjusting to the new normal, will have to lay off staff. So it's not just about from the macroeconomic level that we're going to start doing other things than oil. Even in the micro business level, institutions, businesses, banks, banks' profitability already started showing some weakness, because of the impact in drop on oil, then the devaluation, the unavailability of FX, the huge drop in trade volumes. These are all impacting profitability.
Yeah.
But we will adjust. Give or take 6 months or into the third quarter, I think people will begin to get comfortable, with the new realization that it's not more business as usual. But she made a very, very important point. They need to diversify the economy. It's so very, very important. They need to remove some of the structural imbalances that were in the economy, like with the drop in oil price. Governments, Nigeria, Ghana are using the opportunity to remove subsidies. Which, if you look at it from the socio-economic point of view, is a good thing, but on the long term, it's not really good for business. Government is deregulating some other sectors and opening them up to attract investment, which probably there wasn't any need if we are making all the monies we needed from oil. The devaluation also has happened. As painful as it is, some foreign investors also expected it because they believe that Naira, for instance, was hugely overvalued, given the level of import and the almost non-existent export at the old price. And even still probably are expecting some little more devaluation. When we get there, when our realization, when our reality matches their expectation, then you see them coming more. A lot more of the investors are still holding back because they believe that there are still some structural imbalances that we need to take care of. When a new government comes in, they probably be forced to do those kind of things. Improve internally generated revenue. How much do we generate from tax? Look at Lagos State. It's just a typical example. If we can replicate what has been done in Lagos State nationally. So we don't really need to depend only on oil. Improve government structures, improve transparency. These are the things investors like hearing, and it will only be positive in the long run for the nation.
Cyvette, if I can get your perspective, one of the smaller economies in West Africa, so many of these economies depend on resources. Your experience in Liberia in terms of how everyone is dealing with this new normal that I'm calling it.
Well, the first thing I would like to say is, we consider Nigeria and Ghana to be our big brother. So there are things that we look at and we actually try to do in our country as well. The economy in Liberia has been stable, I would say, during our tenure. I would say our economy has been affected drastically because of the EVD. So we're going through some very difficult trials and times right now. As you know, we have Mittal Steel and other large companies there that actually did a huge drawdown when we were hit by the EVD. And now they're just coming back in. We lost a lot of our airlines in the country as well. Currently, we only have 2 airlines. So literally, for me to come here, I had to go through Casablanca and then come all the way back down. So we're going through some difficulties, but we can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
And unfortunately, we didn't have you in the first part of this conversation, but just give us some perspective on how you are dealing with this EVD, the Ebola virus disease, and its impact on the economies. Do you think we are close to getting past that?
Yes, I do. We have a lot of our large companies coming back in, GVL, Mittal Steel, because a lot of their employees fled because of the EVD. So we have changes that are taking place. Fortunately enough, we have KQ that's also come back into the country because they left. So imagine we lost KQ, we lost British Airways, we lost big airlines.
So quite a few people left.
Yes.
Do you think they're going to come back?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Liberia is open for business, and we're ready. I mean, the fact that we were able to defeat the EVD speaks volumes about us as Liberian people. We are resilient and resistant, and we're going to make sure that our partners come back in and we're open for investment.
So congratulations to Liberia and the authorities there and how you're dealing with that. Okay, but sorry, let me get your thoughts on this. The new opportunities that are opening up in West Africa. We're speaking earlier, Emeka, of course, you remember we mentioned the point that everything is starting from a very low base here. So, Osaru, if you can just speak to the opportunities that are emerging in a country like Nigeria?
Well, I think the opportunities are endless. First of all, of course, Nigeria, like he said earlier, has a huge population. So there's a lot of people, and I think manpower is the #1 asset that any nation could possibly have. And because we have that, I feel like there's not that many businesses that can come into Nigeria and with a lot of resilience and, you know, striving will not succeed. I think definitely healthcare, thanks to, I mean, again, one of the thanks to Ebola, people are now looking at healthcare as something that they need, as an opportunity that they need to go into. People are paying attention and say, oh, us as Africans, we're able to succeed and go past this. That means it's actually possible for there to be some sort of healthcare in Africa in general, because usually people just think once you're sick, there's anything wrong with you, you have to leave. But unfortunately with Ebola, you were stuck, you can't go anywhere. So you had to force, you had to figure out how you were going to fix it. So I think healthcare definitely is one big space that people should look into, because we need to be able to fix our own health. Like, we don't need to look outside for someone to help us when we're sick. We fly out of the country each time. If people focus on healthcare, it's definitely a big industry, and I think for me, I think it's one that I've been looking at and saying, oh my goodness, see what happened with Ebola. Anything could happen tomorrow, and we need to be able to be prepared for it. Not when it comes, we now start looking around and saying, what do we do next? So
well, definitely for us to get manufacturing going, we have to fix infrastructure. And Emeka, can you just speak to that point? The opportunities for the governments across West Africa to really take infrastructure as the big project, because once you can fix that, then everything else, if you like, can get fixed, because you need power to power whatever business that you're involved in. You need roads, you need railways, you need airports, etc. So can you speak to that opportunity for governments to really focus on infrastructure as, if you like, their main focus? Yeah, absolutely, and it makes all the sense. You know, but the bigger problem is that as much as you want to fix infrastructure, power, roads, schools, hospitals, most times you see that the resources are not there to finance those projects, because these are huge capital-intensive projects, and they have very long gestation period. So you can't put it there and turn it out tomorrow and use it for something else. So governments have to be creative. You know, there have been very good templates for PPP projects, right? That's worked. You know, it's all about the political will, the transparency, the openness to go. I mean, these things have been done elsewhere. You don't even need to reinvent the wheel. And there are agencies all over the world that focus on infrastructure. There are actually governments that are willing to help. So it's just for us to better organize ourselves, go there, tell the story, you know, say the way it is, and let these guys realize that when they come and support those projects here, it can actually be run economically as business. And we have good examples, you know. So that is number one. Number two is also to, I don't know how to put it, you know, like say focus. You can't do everything at the same time. You have to prioritize. It is so very important. Like you say, you mentioned power. If we can get power right, and we have talked about power for so long, we have spent so much money on power. If you can just get power, the multiplier effect of power on every other sector of the economy is just enormous. So we can say, okay, a couple of years we're going to focus on power, and not talk about power, talk about bridges, talk about road, because sometimes you carry too much that you can't even get any done at all. But I think definitely there is this, if you like, political will that needs to be brought to bear to fix things. And I think we may have seen to a large extent that happening in Liberia with the EVD. So let's hear from Cyvette on what it takes to fix a problem that is impacting the broader economy.
And what you said is absolutely correct. It's necessary for us to have infrastructure. One of the things that we're currently doing in Liberia now is what we call roads to health. Because we had lots of people that were in the rural areas that didn't have access to clinical facilities, and they couldn't be transported to the cities. Therefore, they just died in the villages. So we need to build our roads. Most importantly, when it comes to water, sanitation, and hygiene is absolutely important. We do not have access to water, pipe-borne water. We don't have access to proper sanitation. And that was the cause of the spread of the EVD, because our people did not have the ability to remove those wastes as it was needed. So they were automatically put in contact with it. So we're dealing with that now. We've realized it as a city mayor of Paynesville. That is something that I would talk about all the time, is about us having proper wash. And I'm happy now that is actually on the table, on the forefront, and the realization has arrived.
I think the biggest story with the success we're seeing in Liberia right now is just dealing with a mammoth problem. I mean, everyone will agree that infrastructure is a big issue in West Africa. And if we can only fix that the same way we fixed Ebola, then we could get on a growth trajectory that we can only imagine where we'll end up. So I really want to hear about that will, that coming together, that leadership that needs to be brought to bear to fix a problem like the EVD. I want to hear how that worked out in Liberia.
Well, I'll tell you, you know, when it comes to Liberia's success story, it was not us that were in the political seats. It was the people. You know, I always...
But the people need to be led.
Yes, well, yes. I mean, we did community engagement. I had to go from house to house, door to door, to 400,000 citizens in my municipality to make sure that they were aware of the signs and symptoms and what to do if they felt that someone in the community had the EVD. So it was the people that actually made this change. It wasn't the city government itself. It wasn't the national government either, because if you have people that are resistant and don't reciprocate the change, then you have an even greater problem.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk, Osaru, if you can just share some thoughts on the integration that we need in West Africa. The opportunity is definitely here in a place like Nigeria. More than half of West Africa's economy is in Nigeria. But then there are other markets as well that are opening up, not just for Nigeria, but the other countries to even come into Nigeria. Your experience, you know, engaging people in this region and the urgency for integration, your thoughts on that point?
I actually think that, I mean, more than ever before, I think Africa is kind of ready to work together. Like we're used to just standing alone and doing one thing. You go somewhere, oh, I'm Nigerian, no, you're this person, you know, but now is the time that we have to actually come together and work together to get to a particular goal that we're getting. So people look at Africa as Africa. We inside Africa often separate ourselves. Oh, this person's from East Africa, South Africa, Nigeria. But it's important for us to actually try to work together. And I see it, again, I always go back to my industry because that's what I'm used to, but I'm actually seeing it here in my industry. South Africa has gone really far with product design. And recently, you know, you get message, we be speaking to them and saying, okay, we're in Nigeria, we don't have the infrastructure to do any type of products, we can't really make furniture ourselves, it's been banned, what do we do? And you know, we've been speaking to them about how do they have these production lines? How do you get it working? I work with the Interior Design Association of Nigeria. So we go to the South African Association and speak to them and see how we could all work together. It's important. People need to stop seeing themselves as a little pebble in the midst of, you know, the this land, but instead we should all come together and try to work together as one, as Africa. Right,
very well said. I want to get your thoughts on this point, Emeka. Everyone speaks to the government, and yes, indeed, the government needs to provide the enabling environment. But then we've seen some interesting dynamics in Nigeria's banking sector, which I think is quite interesting. The banking sector has organized itself to introduce things like this BVN system, which obviously would have an impact on the broader retail banking industry. So your thoughts about the private sector coming together to deal with its problems, and what can we learn from the banks? Because Africa and Nigeria, West Africa as a whole provides awesome opportunities, but like you did mention earlier, the resources are not enough. Sometimes you just have to be creative and innovative about this.
Yeah. Like I mentioned during the first half, you know, we need to organize ourselves. There's a lot for the government to do, but the private sector also can begin to work with themselves.
Right.
Nigerian organized private sector, Ghanaian organized private sector, we can get a lot of things done. We can even begin to form, you know, pressure groups, you know, that would put some pressure on these governments and direct them properly.
Right.
You know, and those interventions work. You know, because there's also so much you can do if the leveling playing ground is not there. You know, let's come back home. Even before we talk about Africa, we're talking about power problem. We're talking about petrol. You know, so very often we have fuel scarcity. And you ask yourself, for such a lucrative sector, why don't we have refineries? You know, but you don't expect international investors, even local investors, to come and invest huge sums that will take a long time to reap. And the sector is still regulated. So that's a big problem. And investors want to put their money where they will make good returns. Risk return, I keep going back to it, right? The day that sector is fully deregulated, it's partly deregulated of some products, but the very core product, gasoline, is still regulated. So would you invest your money in a refinery to produce gasoline when you can't determine the economic price to sell it out? You know, so it's difficult. And that role can only be filled by government.
Right.
But government in doing that a private sector can organize and talk government into deregulating that sector. if you organize yourself and make the right cases, you can get governments to work. That was actually what happened with telecommunication. When it was opened up, before it was an ITEL owned by government with all the inefficiencies of public enterprise, right? But when it was deregulated, investors came in because they felt that there were risks, right? But I can push capital where if I work it well, it will give me good return. And we have seen what has happened in telecommunication. Same with banking. I mean, this success story didn't just happen overnight. 25 years ago, if you wanted to go to a bank in Nigeria, it was a whole day thing. But the government of Babangida, I think, you know, opened up that sector. And private investors went in, and look at what we have got today. You know, but while government has a lot to do, the private sector can also be better organized. Right. You know, in putting the strong advocacy pressures on government to get the level playing field, you know, put in place to now attract much more private capital, and the CD sectors open up.
Right. Osaru, I want to hear your thoughts on this point as well, how the private sector can reorganize itself, especially with respect to skill acquisition. Obviously, in your industry, it's all about skill. So talk to us about that, because one sector that I think is quite interesting in Nigeria, for instance, is the housing sector. I think the government needs to pay closer attention to that, make sure they upskill people who can actually make a living, and of course, we can put, even if it's a small dent on this unemployment figure. Yeah. So your thoughts on how the private sector can deal with the issues that they are dealing with as an industry?
A big thing for me always is partnerships. We need to be able to work together. Like a company, yes, like you mentioned the housing sector, you're doing houses, you're building. The public-private partnerships is important. Also, private partnerships are very important as well. To build that industry, you need to be able to work with people who understand what has been going on. But a lot of times, people have their own business. They want to do it little by little and keep going. But for the industry to be able to grow, it's, I think, working with other people to be able to grow the industry, it makes a lot of sense. The housing industry, I know a little bit about, and it's actually really grown. Again, I'll say in the last 4 years, the amount of people that you have building homes, people are actually building homes out of containers now that are low-income housing. They're doing it in Abuja, and I also know of a company that is about to start it here in Lagos as well. So those companies are growing because they're doing partnerships inside of Nigeria and outside of with companies outside of Nigeria as well, because they understand the group potential for the people who have to live. Shelter is something that is extremely important. People must have homes that they're going to stay in, but not everyone can afford a house everywhere in Lagos. So, and people want to live decent lives as well in their homes. So I think partnerships definitely is something that is very important. Being able to build, like you said, growth structure. Like if you don't have the influx of the money, then you cannot grow in your business. So you have to be able to be open to that inflow. But also the companies need to be prepared, because in Nigeria, it's very easy for people to just start something, run a business and not run it with the proper structures in place. But those structures need to be put in place. So when investment comes, you know, they see the papers and know that all the documents and everything are in place, and then they're able to bring in their money. Like you said, no one is going to bring in money where you're not sure you're going to get something out of it. Right. So we need to have your structures in place and also be ready for partnerships.
Right. Very well said. Cyvette, she spoke about partnerships, and I think we're seeing a little more of that in the smaller economies in West Africa. And if you can just speak to the partnership between countries to get the most out of the opportunity that West Africa provides. Can you just speak to your experience in Liberia? And one partnership, obviously, that we've seen recently is dealing with the EVD.
Yes, and actually that was, we're grateful to the AU and to come in and assist us with that. Our brothers and sisters came in as medics and helped us get rid of the EVD. But I want to, this is the rare time that I want to actually divert from the EVD. Okay, the fact that you're speaking about housing. Housing is a huge issue in the Republic. Right. And right now, like you said, we are doing a lot of PPPs to make sure that our people have access to low-income housing. Now, to divert from that, we need to create what's a middle class in Liberia as well. We have a huge gap in our economy where we have the very disadvantaged and those who are living very luxurious lives. So what we're trying to do now is come out with giving our people loans through CBL, which is the Central Bank of Liberia. Right. Yeah, so that they actually move away from the microloan and actually establish businesses so that they become a large component within the economy. So there are things that we're doing there, and we're trying to move forward progressively. EVD has really, given us a shot in our foot. But we're coming back, very strong, because we know that the EVD actually sort of just tore everything apart, and we could see what we needed to do to make an impact in our nation.
A very, very trying time for the country, I imagine, yes.
So now we're running.
And hopefully you can run very quickly as well. All right, so as we begin to round up, I just want to get everyone's thoughts on, the theme of this year's World Economic Forum for Africa in Cape Town this year is reimagining Africa. And can we just reimagine West Africa for a second here? Your thoughts on starting with you, Emeka, what the future holds for West Africa as an investment destination. So we're looking 5 years, 10 years down the line, from the changes we're seeing in politics, from the changes we're seeing in terms of the world's interest in Africa. What do you see happening?
I think it can only get better. From 15 years ago to 10 years ago to even 2 years ago, and then looking forward into 5 years, it can only get better. If there's a strong role for government to play, we need to improve and strengthen institutions is very, very important. The financial market, we have made huge progress in Nigeria, and that has helped. Investors are looking into this country. Right. We have to be pro-market. We need to run market-driven economies. The era of regulation, FX market or even the local money market, shouldn't even be toyed with again.
Osaru, your thoughts about the future of West Africa?
I think the future is actually quite bright, because I think West Africans, we've started taking ourselves seriously. And you can tell from the elections that just happened here in Nigeria, people actually came out, people actually voted because they wanted to see change. And when you take yourself seriously, other people start to take you seriously as well. Right. So I think the future is bright, and I'm excited to be part of it.
Cyvette, you're coming out of the Ebola crisis. What do you expect?
Well, I will say that democracy, transparency, and accountability speaks volumes about us in West Africa. I was here, I was opportune to be here during your elections. Nigeria was on the front stage with the Women's Situation Room, and I think that we're going in the right direction. We have a lot of things to gain on the West Coast, and of course, I'm elated to be a part of our city government.
Well, it's great to have you here in Nigeria again. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much to everyone for participating in this. We've come to the end of the West Africa leg of the Road to Cape Town debate series. Next week, we travel to East Africa, this time to Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Thank you to my guest, Emeka Uzomba. He's the head of Treasury and Financial Institutions at Diamond Bank. Angel Adelaja, of course, she was with us earlier, Executive Director at Wole Famurewa Africa, and Osaru Alile, Senior Designer and Partner at Caxton Alile Designs, and finally, Cyvette Gibson, Mayor of Paynesville, Liberia. And from me, Wole Famurewa, thank you very much for watching. It's goodbye.